Good afternoon and welcome to State Senator Tom Briese, legislative candidate from District 41. Thank you, Senator, for joining us for our virtual legislative candidate meeting today. My name is Gina Ragland, and joining me today is Susan DeCamp, Bob Lassen, and Danny DeLong, AARP Lead Advocacy Volunteers. We also have with us today Dave Holmquist, the AARP Nebraska State President, and Emily Wick, who's joining us from the AARP State Office as well. So Senator Briese, we appreciate your taking the time to meet and discuss issues of importance to the 50-plus voter and their families across Nebraska. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and will be shared with AARP members across your district prior to the election. With that, Senator, if you want to start off by giving us a little background about yourself and your campaign. Again, we're aiming for 5 minutes or less. That would be great. And once we have completed your opening, we'll move into the questions.
Hey, very good. Well, thank you for having me here today. It's an honor to be here and be joined by you folks. And I appreciate everything that your organization does on behalf of your membership. You do a lot of valuable work and very beneficial work to the folks you represent. And as far as myself, I am running for a second term in the legislature representing the 41st District. I do not have an opponent, but I still have to be out campaigning, talking to constituents nonetheless. And, you know, for me, it's been an honor and a privilege to have served in the Nebraska legislature. And I'm deeply humbled by the opportunity to serve, to represent the constituents of the 41st District. And every chance I get, I thank the voters for giving me the opportunity to serve. And I tell folks that serving in the legislature is a fascinating job. It's fascinating yet frustrating. You know, it's difficult to get things done, but yet it is fascinating work, and I'm enormously thankful for the opportunity to be there. And about myself, I'm a fourth-generation farmer from the Elbin area. I live right at Boone, Nebraska, if anybody knows where that's at, which is kind of southeast part of Boone County. And we raise corn and soybeans here on the farm at Boone, and other than that, wife and I have been married for 34 years, have a couple children and 3 grandchildren, another one on the way, so we're excited about that.
Wonderful. Congratulations, Senator, on the new additions. Those are always fun to add to the family, and certainly in the times that we're in, it makes it even more exciting. So thank you for that. So moving on, we've provided you with a set of 3 questions pertaining to the 50-plus in Nebraska. And again, we're talking 3 questions here with 5 minutes each. Our first question today will come from Dave Holmquist, who is our state president, and he's going to address helping people stay in their homes and communities. So go ahead, Dave.
Hey, thank you, Gina. Welcome, Senator. It's good to meet you. Just as a sidelight, my grandmother was born in Albion, and then they moved back to Minnesota, but that was 1884. So it was a much smaller community then. Anyway.
Sure.
So we want to talk about livable communities, and Albion has always looked like that to me. A livable community is one that is safe and secure, has housing that is affordable. In other words, no more than 30% of your income is spent on housing, has transportation options that allow individuals to travel by multiple means, and has supportive community features and services for people of all ages, which allow people to remain in their communities as they age. So the question is, what steps will you take to ensure all Nebraskans have access to livable community?
Well, and thank you for the question, and great to meet you. And it's interesting that your grandmother was born in Elba, and they do say it's a small world, and that is oh so true, isn't it? Right. But you bet. But great question. As far as concrete steps and specifically what I would do, number one, I understand the importance of livable communities. Keeping the elderly in their homes is extremely important, and we should do everything we can to ensure that our elderly population can stay in the home as long as possible. And to do that, we have to have affordable housing, we have to have community-based services, we have to have a community that allows that to happen, and we have to have caregivers capable of helping or ensuring that that can happen. And so from my standpoint, I don't have the solution necessarily to those issues. but I understand the importance, I understand the concern, and I would be open to anything that will help enable our communities to be livable, be conducive to keeping our elderly population in their homes and create and ensure a good standard of living and a good living environment for our elderly population, along with everyone else, of course. And so to answer your question, I probably didn't give you any good ideas as to what I would do, but I recognize the issue, and I will be supportive of efforts to address that issue.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And just a side note conversation too on this, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on the homestead exemption. That's another area that, you know, kind of overlaps obviously on the taxation revenue side of things, but obviously for people to stay in their homes, oftentimes they cannot afford the costs of the taxes for their home and so forth. And I know there are a lot of people, and as we have an aging population, homestead exemption is really sometimes the key to keeping people in their homes. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yes, during my time in the legislature, I've always advocated and fought for property tax relief. You know, all Nebraskans need property tax relief, ag owners, commercial property owners, and residential homeowners. And utilization of the homestead exemption to help address the property tax burden borne by especially our elderly or low-income folks, I think is extremely important. That's something we can do to provide property tax relief to a subset of our taxpayers, and I think it's important to do so and expand upon that to the extent we can afford to do that.
Great. Thank you for your support on that, Senator. We appreciate it. So moving on to our second question, we're now into health, caregiving, and home and community-based care. And Susan DeCamp will take that question. So Susan, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Senator. And I guess I have to say that I spent many, many, many years in your district. We lived 30 years in St. Paul. Prior to that, we lived 4 years in Spalding, which is just down the road from Albion. And my husband grew up in Neely, and we spent many years around that area. So I am familiar with part of your district. I know you have a huge district, but anyway, real familiar with the Albion area. So I am going to give you the question on health and caregiving. Caregivers help older persons live independently at home by providing assistance with activities like bathing, dressing, and performing medical and nursing tasks, such as administering medication and tending to wounds. But caregivers often provide this service with little or no training and sometimes little or no pay. So with that in mind, I have a two-part question for you. First, would you support helping caregivers with things such as paid leave, respite services, telehealth, and access to education and training? And secondly, how would you protect or expand paid services and supports, as well as financial security that allows more seniors to live independently in their homes and communities?
Well, great question, Susan, and great to see you here today. And it's interesting, your connection to the district and the Albion area also. Thanks for sharing that with me. I recognize the importance of keeping the elderly in their homes as long as possible. You know, the financial, economic implications of not doing so, of not being able to do so, are enormous. It's heart-wrenching when we hear stories of families losing farms, losing estates essentially because of a need to go into a very expensive situation. It's very important to keep the elderly in their home as long as we can. And so as far as the first part of your question, I think my answer is yes, 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 and yes. I would support those endeavors because I think it's extremely important we do so. And from the state's position, those are dollars that represent a good investment. You know, a lot of our elderly, when they end up in a nursing home, a lot of the expenses are borne by the taxpayers, unfortunately. And so the state has an interest in keeping the elderly in their home, keeping them safe, keeping them healthy to the extent we can. And so, yes, I would support those efforts. And then as far as the second part was what again?
It was how would you protect or expand paid services and supports, as well as financial security And I guess, you know, topics, Gina already mentioned homestead exemption. That would be one area of financial security. The ADRCs, if you're familiar with those, provide services and supports.
Yes, and it kind of goes back to what I said earlier. I think it's, you know, unfortunately, so many things today always have been and always will boil down to dollars from the state's perspective. Can we afford to do this? Can we afford to do that? It may be right to do this, but can we afford to do it? Can we justify it from a financial standpoint? And I think many of these things we're talking about, the state can justify additional funding for most of these things. I think you can make a very strong argument that number one, it's important for the welfare of our elderly that, you know, we do what we can to accomplish some of these things. But number two, it's also important to the average taxpayer that we keep our residents in their homes as long as they can, help them thrive in a community-based setting.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
And certainly, Senator, there's nothing better than aging in place. And there are studies out there, you've probably seen that too, but the majority of people, not only Nebraskans, but Americans, want to stay in their homes as long as they can. And so, you know, home and community based, I think, is a really, it's an up and coming concept, but again, how do we provide more of those supports and services that might be minute enough that keeps them in their home and safe? So we very much appreciate your support of that and your comments on that. Our third question then today comes from Bob Lassen, and it will address nursing facility quality. Go ahead, Bob.
To follow the theme, I was born in St. Paul a long time ago, and actually lived on a farm up by Elba until I was 6. And then we moved to Grand Island and then on to Lincoln. Anyway, so we all have a rural feeling here, and I know Gina does too. My question is has to do with nursing facility quality and support of nursing facilities. There's an estimated 6,600 Nebraskans reside in one of Nebraska's 211 nursing homes. By 2040, the University of Nebraska, Omaha projects that number will more than double to almost 14,000. Due to a variety of factors, over the past few years, Nebraska has seen an increase in nursing facilities having to close and residents having to relocate elsewhere, not always convenient to family and friends. How will you ensure that Nebraska residents receive quality nursing home care, including ensuring an adequate nursing workforce, education and training, and proper reimbursement?
Very, very good question. Thank you for bringing that for me here. And thank you for sharing, excuse me, I've got a phone going off here. Thank you for sharing me your connection to the 41st also. That's interesting. Very, very nice. Gina pointed out, and I mentioned it earlier too, about community-based services, and nothing beats staying home, staying in place, aging in place. And so that's obviously the first goal. But when the time comes when one does have to go to a nursing home, what could be worse than having to go to a nursing home 100 miles down the road? You know, nursing home shortages, you know, are a real problem here. If you're going to have to end up in a home, you want to be in your community to the extent you can. You want to be around employees that you know, that your family knows. You want to be around residents that, you know, you perhaps grew up with and aged with, and folks that you know. And so it's extremely critical that we keep our nursing homes in place to the extent we can. We have to avoid nursing home shortages. We have to avoid nursing home closures to the extent we can. And so I think it's very important to do so. And when we talk about providing funds to keep homes in place, to keep homes open, I am extremely supportive of that. You know, number one, to keep our elderly residents, to give them an option, a local option, a place to go when they need to. And also, someone has to bear the cost of care in these facilities. And if we're not stepping up to the plate, if the taxpayers aren't stepping up to the plate, it's thrown over onto the backs of the private payers, and that's not right either. And so to the extent we can afford to do so, we need to fund our nursing homes as well as we can, both to protect the paying residents and to protect our elderly and keep them closer to home in a facility that they're familiar with, in an area they're familiar with. And so I am extremely supportive of the concept of providing resources for our homes, for our facilities, and keeping them open and trying to avoid closures.
I've got just a quick follow-up on that. I think the brunt of where we're having problems is really on the more rural nursing homes. And are there any types of incentives or special reimbursements or any grants or something for a rural facility that maybe would make operations a little better for them financially?
I can't answer that question, but I'd be open to any ideas that would help to accomplish that.
Okay. Thank you.
Right, and I think even in addition to that, Senator, we've talked a lot about workforce investment, especially in our rural communities. And if you train people in the community, they'll stay in the community. Obviously, the intergenerational concept is a key factor here. Is getting to kids at a young age and finding a way to intrigue them into what some of those professions might be. Specifically, there is a nursing shortage across the state, no matter where they work. But we know there's also a nursing shortage in our long-term care facilities. And so just another, and I know there's some work going on in the legislature now to kind of address that, but and I think Northeast Nebraska, Norfolk, has a great program and a great nursing program that they're expanding to other communities out, especially in your area. But I'm assuming that you'd be supportive of more of those kinds of programs where we could incentivize kids to have an interest in long-term care or geriatrics or something of that sort.
Certainly.
Perfect. So we have a few minutes left, and I guess I want to go back to our panel here and ask if anyone else has any follow-up questions for Senator Briese before we get to the end of our interview. No, all right. Thank you, Senator Briese. As we come to the end of our meeting again, I'd like to offer you the final minutes to offer any closing thoughts or comments that you might have or messages you want to send to your constituents. So I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you.
Very good. Well, thank you again for having me here today. It's my pleasure to be here. And again, I appreciate all that you folks do. And my message to you and to all of my constituents would be keep in touch. We need to hear from you on issues important to your constituency, issues important to the 41st and all Nebraskans. We need to hear from Nebraskans on that. And so I always tell folks, keep in touch, let us know. Best way to contact my office is through an email. An email, that way I should see it, my staff should see it, so multiple people should see the email, and that's a better approach than maybe just a phone call to the office or a text or a phone call to my cell number or something like that. It's best to contact the office through an email, but please reach out with ideas, concerns, things we need to be looking at. We're working on bills in the office for next year. We have a handful of things. We're working on half a dozen or so, but we're always looking for ideas that we could put in place or put in the form of a bill that can help the district and help Nebraskans. So again, reach out to us and let us know your concerns and thoughts, suggestions. They're always welcome.
Wonderful. Thank you again, Senator Briese, for taking the time to visit with us. I do thank you for all the support you've provided in the past, and hopefully as we work forward with 50+ on issues in the future. We do wish you the best with your campaign. And again, thank you so much for meeting with AARP Nebraska today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Senator. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.